January 13th, 2006. A quiet suburb of Buenos Aires. A Banco Rio branch is surrounded by a tight police force, 300 heavily armed officers, snipers on the rooftops, helicopters in the sky. Inside, 23 hostages lie face down on the cold marble floor, while masked men wave pistols overhead. One wrong move, and it will all devolve into a massacre. And then, out of nowhere, the leader of the robbers demands pizza. The negotiator assumes he's crazy, but he's wrong, because while the entire city holds its breath, watching the bank's front door, right under the police's feet, in the dungeon, the second team is already stuffing bags with cash, gold, and diamonds. The hostage-taking above is pure show, the weapons are fake, and the real robbery takes place underground. And within hours, 6 robbers will vanish from the completely surrounded bank, as if they had never been there. This is the story of the most daring and ingenious heist the world has ever seen, and how the perfect crime finally failed. But it won't be the police who bring it down. It all began more than 2 years earlier in the cramped apartment of an artist named Fernando Araujo. The young, perpetually broke artist was looking at newspaper clippings about a botched bank robbery in the late 1990s, when a police raid ended in the deaths of hostages live on television. Anyone else would have been horrified. But Araujo saw in these images not a tragedy, but a challenge. What if a bank could be robbed without anyone getting hurt? What if the robbers disappeared from the surrounded building not through a shootout or surrender, but as if by magic? He literally sketched out the idea on a napkin. Robbery as a magic trick. Robbery as a work of art. All that remained was to transform this crazy idea into a precise, workable plan. Araujo turned to a school friend, Sebastián García Bolster, a mechanic who repaired motorcycles in a garage on the outskirts of town. Bolster's hands, accustomed to welding and metalwork, could assemble anything. He also had a personal bank account. During the economic collapse of 2001, his family, like millions of Argentines, lost their entire savings overnight. The banks simply froze depositors' money. When Araujo suggested robbing Banco Rio, Bolster didn't laugh. He only asked one thing: how? And the choice of a branch in the wealthy suburb of Acasuso was no accident. After the collapse, wealthy clients stopped trusting their bank accounts and began hiding valuables, cash, gold, stones, in safe deposit boxes. And unlike marked bills from a cash register, the contents of private safe deposit boxes are untraceable. Ideal prey for those who wanted to get even with the banks that had ruined their country. The idea was both simple and brilliant. 2 teams would strike simultaneously. One would stage a hostage situation upstairs, pure theater, to draw the police's full attention. The second, meanwhile, would infiltrate from below, through a storm drain, and calmly empty the vault. No violence, no casualties, just a distraction of unprecedented proportions. Bolster calculated that the underground passage would have to travel about 150 meters through active sewer pipes and penetrate almost half a meter of reinforced concrete, all unnoticed. For most, impossible. But not for an engineer who had spent his life building the impossible. Araujo, however, wrote out the operation like a film script, complete with lines and stage directions. The above-ground team became actors, the robbery itself a performance, and the performance had a strict timeline, exactly 2 hours and 7 minutes. That was exactly how long it would take to open enough vaults. Not a second less, or the underground team would be caught. Not a second longer, or the police might look into the basement. There was no room for error at all. To appreciate the audacity of their plan, it's worth briefly imagining the scale. 6 men planned to rob a bank, not stealthily, in the dead of night, but in broad daylight, in full view, surrounded by 300 armed police officers, snipers, and helicopters. They weren't just planning to slip away, they were planning to do it in such a way that no one would even realize where they were. Not a single detail could fail. Not the tunnel, not the timing, not the actors' performances, not the driver's nerves. Any little detail threatened to bring everything down at once. And all the more astonishing is that this unthinkable plan ultimately worked almost flawlessly. Hence the nickname, the heist of the century. By the beginning of the following year, it was time to assemble a team, and not everyone was willing to take on such a task against 300 police officers. The core team consisted of seasoned robbers of the old school, who knew the vault's layout, police reaction times, and hostage psychology by heart. A particularly important role was played by Uruguayan Luis Mario Vitete, a man with military training and a master of intimidation without firing a shot. It was said that he once held dozens of hostages for several hours using only persuasion, without ever using a weapon. His calm authority compelled them to obey. Another veteran, nicknamed Doc, took over reconnaissance. For 3 months, he photographed the bank from every angle, studying security shift changes, the arrivals of cash collectors, the manager's habits, and finally identified the golden window, Friday, when wealthy clients arrive at their safe deposit boxes before the weekend and the guard's vigilance is relaxed. A getaway driver was also found, the only one who did not enter. There were 6 of them in total. Different people, different motives, revenge, money, passion. But they were all connected by Araujo's plan. A special role fell to the driver, the only one who never set foot inside the bank. A former race car driver, he'd grown up around motors and knew how to squeeze every last drop out of a car. Long before the job, he'd studied nearly 24 escape routes, measured the minutes it would take the police to reach the bank from each nearby precinct, and memorized the route so thoroughly he could drive it blindfolded. At the appointed hour, he was to wait by a manhole cover 3 blocks away, engine running, ready to pick up the underground team at any moment. One delay, one wrong turn, and they'd all be caught. His composure was as crucial as the engineer's tunnel. Meanwhile, the man nicknamed Doc spent weeks turning the bank into an open book. He compiled a minute-by-minute schedule of the branch's life, what time the guards changed, when the armored car arrived, what time the manager went out to smoke behind the building. From these observations came the golden window, the Friday before the weekend, when wealthy clients flocked to their safe deposit boxes to collect cash and jewelry before short trips, and the vault is temporarily open and especially hectic. It was at this hour that the loot in the safe deposit boxes was greatest, and the guards least vigilant. They studied not only the routine, but also their personalities, which employees were obedient, who might panic, who should be kept in plain sight. By January 13th, the robbers knew the people inside almost better than they knew themselves. No serious operation of this kind can be carried out without such painstaking, almost tedious preparation. And the more boring and meticulous the reconnaissance, the more impressive the trick itself looks later. It's worth noting that they approached the task with genuine scientific tenacity. To pay for expensive tools, pumps, and gear, the team first quietly robbed a smaller bank and used the money to properly equip themselves. Then began endless rehearsals in an abandoned warehouse, where the robbers ran through the entire operation over and over in real time. What if the police stormed the building prematurely? What if a hostage suffered heart problems? What if the tunnel flooded? They practiced every scenario until their reactions became instinctive, memorizing their lines like actors before a premiere. There was also one ironclad rule, which someone asked about. What if someone dies, whether a hostage, a police officer, or one of their own? Araujo's answer was instant. Then drop everything and run. This plan only works if no one dies. And upstairs, everything was meticulously planned down to the last word and gesture. Intelligence had identified every camera in the hall and the blind spots near the basement stairs, and studied the habits of every officer, who arrived first, who carried keys, which security guards had never drawn their weapons in years of service. Araujo's scenario outlined the raiders' behavior literally minute by minute. They decided to release the hostages one at a time at regular intervals. That way, the police would maintain hope for a peaceful outcome and not rush the assault. Blanks were fired occasionally toward the ceiling, just enough to keep the cordon tense without provoking an attack. Even the absurd demand for pizza wasn't a whim, but a cold calculation. Every word served a single purpose: to control not so much the hostages as the psychology of the police on the outside. The hardest part, of course, was the tunnel. Bolster, now called the engineer, descended into the sewers at night, wearing a wetsuit and a headlamp. The stench of sewer, methane, scurrying rats, pitch darkness. He measured distances with laser-like precision and, little by little, in short bursts, bit into the concrete beneath the storage facility, working for a few seconds at a time, pausing, listening for footsteps above. Over the long night, he managed to advance only a few centimeters. Autumn rains flooded the tunnel, forcing pumps powered by car batteries and wooden supports to keep the tunnel from collapsing. One day, the methane detector howled so loudly that he had to flee and return with an oxygen tank. Another time, he stumbled upon a homeless man living in the pipes, and then anxiously scanned the newspapers to see if there had been any reports of a strange man underground. But all was quiet. And so he dug on, night after night, week after week, until, 5 days before Christmas, the last layer of concrete finally gave way. Just days before the mission, the team held a final dress rehearsal, running through the entire operation from entry to exit, second by second. Araujo handed out props, plastic pistols weighted with lead to feel like the real thing, masks, gloves, and coveralls for the underground team. They synchronized their watches. They even timed the weather. Clear skies and 100-degree temperatures were predicted for January 13th. In such heat, the police would surely forego their heavy armor. Everything was in sync. The 6 men were ready for the performance of their lives, and all that remained was to wait for the appointed hour. And then came that very day, January 13th. While the underground team was breaking through the sealed hatch and penetrating the vault from below, 3 accomplices in business suits entered the bank through the front entrance. One of them approached the counter as if to open an account, and the next moment drew his pistol. "Everyone, freeze! This is a robbery!" The Uruguayan's voice rang with such authority that everyone froze. In just a minute and a half, the 6 actors had taken control of the entire bank. Alarm bells soon began ringing, and the building was surrounded by dozens of patrol cars, then hundreds of officers, snipers, and helicopters. And inside, the Uruguayan, now using a false name, began his act. He called the police, speaking calmly, almost apologetically. "We don't mean anyone any harm. We just need time to think." As a sign of goodwill, he released one of the employees. She emerged in tears and explained that the robbers were nervous but not aggressive. The negotiators mistook this for weakness. And they were sorely mistaken, because down below, beneath the feet of 300 police officers, the real work was underway. Pneumatic tools ripped open compartment after compartment in seconds. From some spilled stacks of dollars and euros, from others gold coins and antique jewelry, from still others a scattering of stones that rolled across the floor like green stars. They worked methodically, wall after wall. And here's what's telling. Some compartments were left untouched by the robbers. They contained family photos, letters, the ashes of deceased relatives. They left all of this untouched, taking only the money and valuables. The loot was placed in waterproof bags, and to ensure the police above didn't let their guard down at the wrong time, the ground crew pulled off their famous move. They demanded pizza. The negotiator, hearing this, almost burst out laughing. What pizza during a siege? But the absurd request was calculated. The food order had to be coordinated throughout the chain of command, saving precious minutes. And the pizza was eventually delivered, under police guard, right to the doors of the besieged bank. For the hostages themselves, those hours turned into a strange, almost surreal reality. They were held at gunpoint with toy pistols, something they, of course, had no idea about. But they were treated with exaggerated calm and even courtesy. When the manager was brought to the window for the police to see, the Uruguayan, according to reports, quietly apologized. "Sorry, senora, but the police need to see you." And then they brought everyone that very pizza, and the people who had recently been lying face down nervously munched on it under gunpoint, unsure whether it was a dream or reality. Later, one of the hostages would call it the most surreal meal of her life. It was this strange, almost polite cruelty that would later disarm the entire country. After just over 2 hours, the underground team had opened over 100 vaults, and the bags were bulging with loot, which would later be valued at anything from $8 to over $20 million. It was time to leave. The robbers left a note on the wall that became a legend. In the rich quarter, without weapons or malice, it's just money, not love. Then they descended back into the tunnel, loaded the bags onto an inflatable boat, and floated through the pitch-black sewage. 3 blocks from the bank, a driver with the engine running was waiting for them at a manhole cover. One by one, they emerged to the surface, wet, stinking, but victorious, and disappeared into the traffic. Meanwhile, police were still diligently surrounding the bank, which was now empty. Before leaving, the Uruguayan locked the remaining hostages in a basement room, carefully laid out toy pistols by the door, and lied to the negotiators one last time. "We're leaving in 5 minutes." Several hours passed before the special forces decided to storm the building. Flashbang grenades thundered, and the soldiers burst into the rooms shouting, "Clear!" They found 23 terrified but unharmed hostages locked in the basement. They found a neat row of toy guns. They found pizza boxes, some still warm. The only thing missing was the robbers. The commander reported to headquarters. The suspects had disappeared. Silence fell over the radio. And then someone asked in confusion, "What do you mean, disappeared?" Descending into the vault, the detectives saw the vaults gaping open, seemingly screaming, the floor strewn with pearls and scraps of velvet, and then a hole. A perfectly round hole, leading into the darkness of the underground sewers that stretch for miles beneath the city. And from the wall above them, that very note mockingly stared back. One of the detectives quietly said out loud what everyone was thinking. We were outplayed. By morning, the story had taken over every screen in the country, and the reaction was unexpected. Argentina wasn't so much outraged as delighted. After banks froze the savings of millions in 2001, many saw a kind of poetic justice in the heist. The robbers had robbed the rich, and the banks without killing or injuring anyone. Supportive calls flooded the radio. Graffiti with the score "Robbers 6, Police 0" appeared on walls. T-shirts with toy guns sold out instantly, and a cheerful song about the robbery topped the local charts. Headlines screamed, "We were robbed with toys." International media called the case audacious to the point of genius. Of course, the crime had real victims, the owners of the safe deposit boxes who lost their valuables. But in the eyes of the public, the 6 robbers became folk heroes and masters of disappearance. It's important to understand what motivated these people. Otherwise, it's impossible to explain why half the country later sided with them. They saw themselves not as bandits, but as avengers. After the collapse of 2001, many Argentines saw the banks themselves as the main robbers, leaving honest people without their savings. The robbers seemed to be repaying their debt, but in their own way, with ostentatious elegance and without a drop of bloodshed. Hence the note on the wall, the refusal to touch other people's family heirlooms, and the ironclad rule of not allowing a single death. They wanted not just to get rich, but to beautifully humiliate the system that had humiliated them first. And admittedly, they succeeded. Over time, this robbery became firmly ingrained in popular culture. It was the subject of songs and jokes, debates on talk shows, and graffiti. Many years later, the story was brought to the big screen, and the film only cemented the robbers' image as charming rogues who outsmarted both the bank and the police. The robbers themselves willingly gave interviews, and the mastermind behind the whole affair turned his crime into a source of fame and profit, discussing it as an artistic statement. Few robberies have had such a long life beyond the crime itself, in books, on screen, and in popular memory. Meanwhile, the police launched the largest manhunt in the country's history. Forensic experts combed every inch of the bank, but the robbers had planned for everything. Bleach was spilled everywhere to obliterate traces, and hair clippings from barbershops were scattered as false evidence to throw them off the trail. The abandoned van turned out to be empty, and the tunnel yielded no traces. Hundreds of witnesses were questioned, thousands of hours of footage were reviewed, numerous leads were pursued, all to no avail. By spring, the investigation had reached a dead end. No suspects, no arrests, no progress. Ministers promised quick results, but the public merely scoffed. It seemed the robbers had truly vanished without a trace, and not 300 police officers nor the best detectives could defeat them. But every perfect team has a weak link, and it was not in the bank, but at home. Meanwhile, the police's failure had become a national joke. While minister after minister promised to solve the case at any moment, the country openly mocked the law enforcement officers for losing to a gang with toys. Pressure mounted, newspapers competed in wit, and the investigation stalled without a single viable lead. From the outside, it seemed the robbers had won once and for all. No one could have imagined that the solution would come not from underground or from a forensic lab, but from the bedroom of one of the most ordinary-looking houses in the suburbs. The thing is, big money changes people and destroys families. The wife of one of the burglars, a woman named Alicia, kept finding hidden bundles of bills in the house, sometimes under the floorboards, sometimes in the wall behind fresh plaster. She knew perfectly well where the money came from. What she didn't know was that her husband was planning to leave her. He had an affair and was already considering leaving the country with a younger mistress. When the deception was revealed, the insulted and betrayed woman made a decision that would ruin everything. She went to the police and told them what she knew. Names, meetings in her own kitchen where she served coffee to her accomplices, conversations about a tunnel, toy guns, and pizza. In exchange for protection for herself and her child, she gave the investigation everything. The perfect crime was destroyed, not by the police, but by the oldest of human weapons: betrayal, born of a broken promise. At dawn, simultaneous searches began throughout Buenos Aires. One of the ringleaders was caught sleeping next to almost $1 million in cash. He didn't even resist. Next came the Uruguayan, then Doc, and then the rest, including Araujo himself and the engineer. Almost everything hinged on the testimony of the devoted wife and the money found in her husband's house. But the lion's share of the loot remained unaccounted for. When news of the arrest spread across the country, the public reacted unexpectedly, with disappointment. Polls showed that most Argentines would prefer the robbers to remain free. Lawyers volunteered to represent them pro bono, sympathizers gathered outside the courthouse, and even some former hostages refused to testify, saying they had been treated surprisingly politely. The trial itself turned into a spectacle. Araujo, a born performer, carried himself as if he were on stage, explaining the robbery as a work of art against financial tyranny. The engineer described the tunnel's construction with professorial precision, drawing laughter from the audience. The Uruguayan maintained his imperturbable military bearing. They didn't deny their guilt, they denied their shame. And when asked about the missing millions, Araujo merely smirked. "What money? We came to the bank with toys." Proving the exact amount stolen was nearly impossible. The contents of the safe deposit boxes were not listed anywhere, and the victims were reluctant to admit how much they had lost, lest they themselves be faced with uncomfortable questions about the origin of their wealth. The sentences ultimately turned out to be surprisingly lenient, and a few years later, all the robbers were released. Araujo wrote a book, sold film rights, and lectured on creative resistance. He said that everyone won in this story. The police and prosecutors got glory, the country got unprecedented entertainment, and they got money. So what was the secret of this heist? It was conceived not as a crime, but as a magic trick. 6 men proved that manipulating others' perceptions is more important than wielding a real weapon, and that a well-executed performance can outshine 300 armed police officers. They turned robbery into art, the humiliation of the authorities into a national legend, and their own arrest almost into a triumph. Almost. Because one of them lost everything. Money couldn't save his marriage, nor love, nor the respect of his accomplices. The man who helped pull off the flawless heist was broken not by the police, but by a broken promise made at home. In the end, it was the insulted wife who did what 300 police officers couldn't. She made the magicians disappear forever. What do you think? Are these brilliant criminals or ordinary thieves who just happen to become legends? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching to the end, and see you soon.